This is the Paul McGuire Report. I'm Paul McGuire. On today's program, we're going to deal with a reality that is very real and in your face. But the tragedy is that at least 50% of Americans or more, probably closer to 65% of Americans, cannot see the obvious reality that is playing out before them. And it's very tragic because they cannot discern the signs of the times, if you will, and because they don't understand what's happening nationally and globally, they are clueless to the fact that harm is coming their way in a very serious manner. As Ray Bradbury, the science fiction writer, wrote, something wicked comes this way. And indeed, something wicked is coming our way. The question is, who can see the obvious? Now, probably a huge percentage of the people listening to the Paul McGuire Report, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You're up to speed. You do your homework. You read. You listen to programs like this. But you have, and I have, countless friends and family members and people we run into in society where we could never bring up this type of discussion. And you know why we couldn't bring up this type of discussion? Well, you already know the answer. If we brought up this type of discussion, the truth of this discussion, you see, if it was an illusion, this discussion, if this discussion was a falsehood or a fabrication, it wouldn't produce the reaction that it always produces. The reality is, precisely because this discussion deals with truth, is why it so often causes a reactionary response among that percentage of the American people and the people on planet Earth who are, to put it bluntly, and I'm not trying to be disparaging, I'm really not, but they're walking around in a scientifically induced mind control state. They have been socially engineered. They have been programmed. They are in a level of hypnotic trance. And it goes beyond, the hypnotic trance that they're in is subtle. It's not like they're walking around, falling asleep to the count of 1, 2, 3 or whatever. It's far more subtle than that. You can talk to people who appear to be totally normal, totally awake, totally alive. Sometimes they're nice people, interesting people, but the fact of the matter is, at the core of their psychological being, they are in a varying degrees of a hypnotic state. They've been programmed. Now, it's very difficult for people who have been programmed to wake up, to come out of the trance state. And when you even bring this up to these people, they laugh, they scoff, they get angry, sometimes they get rude, they get highly insulting, they get emotional. And the reason for those reactionary responses is because when you have brought the truth up to these people, it rubs something in their inner man or inner woman. It strikes a chord deep down inside. It strikes a chord of reality, of truth. But they have been so locked in, so compartmentalized, so programmed, that when somebody presents the truth to them, even conversationally, their reaction will be highly emotional, highly reactionary, because they are threatened. They are threatened by the truth, and the idea that this truth might break the spell that they are under, they find frightening. Their psychological equilibrium that they base their lives on is shaken, and they find themselves walking around on a foundation of reality that really isn't real. It's an illusion. Now, I know you know what I mean, because you've talked to these people, I've talked to the people. So If we love our neighbor as ourselves, which is what Jesus Christ commanded us to do, one of the things that we have to do if we truly love our neighbor as ourselves is to awaken them out of the trance state, out of the state of scientific mind control, so that their minds can be set free. And when their minds are free, and only when their minds are free, they can then have the freedom to look at reality and look at what's happening in real terms. Otherwise, they're looking at reality and they're receiving an illusion that is being projected into their subconscious mind, and they're being controlled by it. Now, inevitably, when I will talk to a group of people or people one-on-one, the response, for the most part, is statistically the at least half the people, or a greater percentage than that, they're interested. They have a quest for honesty. They have a quest for truth. But there's also a disturbingly large percentage, and it has nothing to do with educational level. The more educated you are, often is the more susceptible you are to scientific mind control. That's why you have so many large cults whose cult members are highly educated people. So education doesn't prepare somebody or protect somebody from this dynamic. But we have to face a reality, okay? We can't beat around the bush. Time is really running out quickly. And we have to understand the basics of reality and quit playing games. If we say we love God, we're called by God to speak the truth, not only the truth of Christ's salvation, but the truth about all of reality. Jesus Christ said, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free." So what that means is that we must come to understand that the world we live in, including this nation that we live in, is not ruled and governed by the politicians and the people in power and the institutions that you have been taught to believe are controlling things. You are in a matrix, and you are programmed to believe that, you know, the president, this political party, that political party, this person or that person, this institution or that institution, that they're the ones controlling things. But the fact of the matter is, behind all the smoke and mirrors, behind the big-time light show, behind the curtain, you hear this booming voice, "I am the great and mighty Wizard of Oz." And people are enraptured. They're mesmerized by that. Mesmerized comes from the word Mesmer, which was a famous psychologist in history. And Mesmer created the practice of hypnosis. And when he put somebody in a hypnotic state, it was called being mesmerized. So people believe that the Wizard of Oz is the great and mighty Wizard of Oz. They believe in the matrix. They believe in the illusion. And very few have the courage to venture into reality and see what's really behind the curtain. And those that do, like Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz, they see that the Wizard of Oz is not some great and mighty Wizard of Oz. He's some old man standing on a stool, speaking through a loudspeaker system, and the entire idea of the great and mighty Wizard of Oz is a total illusion. So who is really running our planet right now? And they've been running our planet for centuries. It's just people are in a hypnotic trance and they can't see it. The people really running our world, our nation, are this invisible elite or a shadow government behind a government. And they use things that they have created, such as the deep state, to be enforcers of their reality. And I want to say that again, because you're not going to get that in just one passing remark, and it's important. The people that are part of or who control the shadow government or the invisible government behind the government, the people who really have the power in this world, they run this world through an entire spectrum and mechanism of illusions. And the enforcers of this artificial reality are the deep state, because the deep state applies the muscle, the police force, the technology, the financing, the scientists that perpetuate a mythology, perpetuate an illusion that controls the people. So most of the people that you know, including Christians, sadly to say, are being controlled by an illusion. Now, I refer to this in depth, great depth, in my book, Conquering the Matrix, because it's all about this. It's all about the fact that you have to conquer the matrix in order to be set free. What is the matrix? It's simply a contemporary term for the Luciferian world system of illusion. It's simply a contemporary expression for this world system, which is run by Satan and Lucifer, and this artificial reality we've been programmed to live in. And so everything around us, we process the information around us through primarily our physical senses. So our visual senses, our hearing or auditory senses, our physical or tactile or touching senses, our smelling senses, and we go down the list. And what we see with our senses is what we're taught to believe is real. But the problem is the deep state, following the orders of this invisible government, is all about the business of manipulating your reality, manipulating what you think you see with your senses, and creating an illusion and maintaining an illusion which ultimately makes you a slave. Aldous Huxley wrote about this, and you know I've talked about it in endless detail, and I'll keep talking about it because his work, his writings, his teachings are an inexhaustible source of truth on this subject. Aldous Huxley wrote Brave New World, which was about a scientific dictatorship that used these mechanisms to control the people. Aldous Huxley advocated the use of psychedelic drugs to control the masses, and programming and brainwashing that used repetition and hypnosis so people would walk around in like a trance state. Now, let's bring this into the environment of the real world. Let's get down to the nitty-gritty. And this may be difficult for some of you. And if it isn't difficult for you personally, it's very difficult for you, for many of the people you know, and sadly to say, Christians. But your job and my job is to strategically, like fishers of men, open people up to the truth of reality so they can be opened up to the biblical truth and to the truth of Jesus Christ. So let's just talk about a national phenomenon that's been going on for the last, 8 years, and it's been accelerating, 10 years and accelerating. And that is this endless series of mass school shootings or mass shootings in other environments. Now, the media, which is like George Orwell's Thought Police, they are about the business of not discovering the truth. That's not their business. Their business is to keep you in the hypnotic state so that you believe the version of the truth they want you to believe. And so they will manipulate what interviews, what pictures you see, what sounds you see. But without drawing a conclusion, because it's very difficult to draw a final conclusion on these matters. It's not simply a matter of assessing the facts and contrasting them with the different accounts of how things happened. It's deeper than that. And so it's very hard to make an assessment. It's very hard to come to a final conclusion. But at least we need to begin to ask the questions. So there is a very high percentage of these mass shootings in which there is very, very strange, contradictory, and disturbing facts and information that shakes, rattles, and rolls the official story. I mean, a case in point, this recent school shooting. Okay, the recent school shooting, but we hear different testimonies from different witnesses that were actually there at that school shooting. And these different witnesses giving these different testimonies are giving testimonies about what happened that portray radically different accounts, important differences in the accounts of what really happened. Let me give you an example. I know most of you are familiar with this. We have some accounts at this recent school shooting that a teacher, a female teacher, heroically opened the door to her classroom and herded in as quickly as she could as many of the students as she could. When she looked down the hallway of the school, she saw the shooter in plain sight. I think he was 20 feet away. I'm not sure about the exact distance. And this teacher said that these students were running for their lives because they were being fired upon, and these are the words she used, by a very strange-looking gun that she did not recognize. Okay, well, what that means is this teacher is familiar with guns, and she is familiar with the traditional guns that are out there. She may not be a gun expert, but she has a knowledge of guns, or she couldn't have said that. And she said this school shooter was using a weapon that was sophisticated and different than the weapon that the other reports said the shooter had. Number two, she said, this shooter was wearing a face mask where you couldn't see any part of his face. In addition, this shooter was wearing body armor and camouflage, and she thought that the shooter looked like one of the police. Okay, now we're not saying that the shooter was in the police force, but we are saying this. There's a radical difference in her description, and she had a close-up viewpoint of this shooter, than the other testimonies that have come forward, where the people all swear that the shooter was wearing a casual outfit, no body armor, no face mask, and that he was carrying his weapon in a loose bag, and that he had a knapsack with rounds of ammunition. Now, this doesn't make sense, because as the shooter was entering, the shooter, according to eyewitnesses, shot several people and wounded them with his gun before he entered the interior of the school. So people were shot by the shooter in the exterior of the school, which gives us a problem. If the shooter was indeed wearing a dark face mask, body armor, and looking like one of these militarized police, he's moving very quickly. He shoots a bunch of people in the exterior of the school. So what does he then do? Does he take off or change his clothes? Does he put down his bag and completely changed into a militarized police look with body armor, a face mask, and a camouflage outfit, and some high-powered rifle? No, that's ridiculous. He wouldn't have slowed down to do that. He would have been killed by somebody. So this then brings us to the question, who was it that this school teacher saw? Who'd she see? And then there are numerous accounts of a second shooter, in addition to the shooter who was arrested. So we have problems with the official account. We also have the additional problem that the police earlier that day were rehearsing a shooting event. Now, one of the things that seems to be a common phenomenon of these mass shootings is that there's a certain percentage of them where the police or the fire department are carrying on active shooting drills or fire drills in very close proximity, most often the same day, to these actual shootings. So we have problems with the official account. Then the people that go on television, there's strange oddities about them. To me, an oddity is the student that seems to be the spokesman for all this. His father is an FBI agent. I find that not conclusive of anything. I just find it very, very interesting. Now, if we go to the mass shooting in Vegas, we were told by the media and all these officials that the shooting was done by the one shooter, Stephen Paddock, over and over again. Yet we heard conflicting testimonies from the crowd who went to see the country music festival, and it's on tape, and they're screaming that they are being shot at from a different direction by multiple shooters. Now, let's replay that again. The people who are being shot at in the Vegas Country Music Festival are reporting that there are multiple shooters shooting at them, bullets coming at them from different directions. That contradicts the official report, which says there was just one shooter. But we see on video very conspicuous things, such as a room in the same hotel on a lower floor where there's automatic assault rifle shots being fired, and it's being videotaped from a room on a lower level floor that is far away from Stephen Paddock's room. So if indeed our eyes don't deceive us and there isn't some other rational explanation for the gunfire that is emerging on a lower floor, right then and there you would see, you would have to ask the question, were there multiple shooters? But there are so many people who have come forward who said there were multiple shooters, it almost becomes a moot point. Then, when you see the video footage of inside Stephen Paddock's hotel room, it's a very contrived interior. It's like somebody went out of their way to try to create a symbolic picture of how evil guns were and how even evil assault rifles were. But the most conspicuous thing of all about this Vegas shooter is that I forgot the exact number of rounds he allegedly shot onto the crowd of country music fans. But the number of shell casings in his hotel room was a small fraction of the number of bullets that he actually fired from his hotel room. And then we were told by experts that when a bullet is fired from this kind of automatic rifle, that the shell hits the carpet and will burn a hole in the carpet surrounding the shell. So when you see the video footage, there's a conspicuously small number of bullet shells to begin with, and a conspicuously small number of shells which have burned the carpet. So we have a problem here. The official story is that the shooter was one shooter, and he fired, it was some massive amount of rounds of bullets into the country music crowd. Yet, for every bullet fired from that window, there should be a shell casing on the floor of his hotel room to match the bullet that's fired. So let's just do a hypothetical computation here. Let's say the shooter and I'm not saying these are accurate numbers. I can't remember the exact number of rounds he fired. But let's say he fired a total of 40,000 rounds of ammunition into the country music crowd. Okay, 40,000 rounds. That would mean, unless certain rounds got lost or fell out the window or whatever, that there should be pretty close to 40,000 shell casings on the floor of the hotel room, and every place a shell casing landed, there would have to be burn marks on the carpet, etc. But only a fraction, and again, I'm not saying 40,000 was the exact number, but to give you an idea of the ratio and the disturbing difference between the amount of rounds fired and the amount of shells collected, if the number was 40,000 rounds of ammunition, there was only like 3,000, 4,000 shells in the hotel room. So what happened to the other 37,000 rounds of ammunition? Why aren't there any shell casings? That's a very disturbing fact that nobody in the media, which betrays their honesty, by the way, bothered to examine. It's a glaring contradiction. It doesn't point conclusively to the reality of a second shooter, but it certainly asks the question. And we could go down the list of all these mass shootings. The vast majority of these mass shootings have very serious problems with the official account, because nothing appears to have gone down the way it is being told to the public. Many times there are eyewitnesses who saw multiple shooters when the official story said it's one shooter. Other times we hear, like this one in the school the other day, we have heard all these different accounts, whether this police officer stood outside and waited and didn't go in. We heard another account of a police officer who was supposedly off duty, who ran into the building heroically. And yet we don't hear, and then there appears to be in many of these mass shootings dissensions, conflicting stories in the testimonies of the various law enforcement officials. So where does this bring us? It brings us not to a conclusion. We don't have enough evidence for a solid conclusion. But it brings us to the place where any sane, rational, and thinking person would have to acknowledge the contradictory evidence and start to do research and examine the contradictory evidence. But what we see our media doing is the mainstream media is like a George Orwell thought police media. It's not in the business of telling the truth. It's in the business of promoting its own agenda, of creating its own reality, and suppressing any facts or information or testimonies that contradict whatever story they want to push. Now, this is like in the world of George Orwell. So the question you got to ask yourself is the reality that you're seeing on television and reading about in the newspapers the real reality, or is the real reality what is attempting to be suppressed by the mainstream media and other forces that's showing up on YouTube and alternative media? And then ask yourself this question. The success of the alternative media, the success of media outside of the mainstream media, because people are hungry for truth and millions of people are seeking out these websites and YouTubes, it is damaging the credibility of the mainstream media. And so what does the mainstream media want to do? It wants to continue to call the alternative media fake news, and it wants to use the power of government, law enforcement, YouTube, Google, Facebook, and all the search engines, and anybody who publishes an account, even if it's true. Truth has nothing to do with their equation. Any truth that these other media outlets are telling, the mainstream media and the power elite that work with them are seeking to destroy those YouTube sites, to censor those YouTube videos, to bring down artificially the blog sites and the websites and destroy them. Why? Because they want to destroy the truth. They want to keep the mass American mind or the mass American consciousness in a collective state of mind control to further their agenda. And what is their agenda, by the way? It's very simple to figure out what their agenda is. Very simple indeed. Their agenda is in your face. Because conspicuously, in many of these shooting events, they begin promoting their agenda before the actual tragedy happens, and then in the weeks following the tragedy, they keep promoting their agenda. What is their agenda? Gun control. So there were press conferences, there were national news broadcasts before this recent school shooting that were all promoting gun control. And then the school shooting happened, and again, it's gun control. So every one of these mass shootings creates an intended psychological environment of fear, which drives the average unthinking American to respond emotionally rather than responding logically and based on the facts, to responding emotionally and to cry out for gun control, even though there is no data or statistics to suggest that gun control would have saved any lives. In fact, there have been many, many testimonies among those who were victims that gun control would have increased the number of casualties, and what is really needed was not gun control, but more guns in the hands of responsible people. But the media doesn't want to hear that, because their agenda is gun control. Now, why is their agenda gun control? Is it because gun control is going to bring about a safer, happier America? Is that why the mainstream media and the politicians all want gun control? Because it's going to bring more safety to more Americans, more happiness and more peace to more Americans? Is that their motive? No. It's not their motive, because they don't have any evidence to prove that gun control produces that. The motive for gun control is one that is embedded in history, especially in the last 150 years. As we discussed on yesterday's program, there is a formula that always works. Create crisis, create chaos, create terrorism, create shooting events, to cause the people in whatever nation to be terrified, and then have the government offer a solution of confiscating all the guns to, quote, protect the people of various nations. But what always happens, see, the equation doesn't work. The gun control does not produce safety. What always works historically, this is a historical fact, what always works, without exception, is when you begin confiscating the weapons from the law-abiding peaceful people, is that tyrannical, dictatorial, police state governments then begin to attack, arrest, shoot, kill, and destroy all the innocent people in that nation, because these innocent people are no longer armed and they have no way to resist tyranny and oppression. So the formula, Adolf Hitler used the formula, the communist revolutionaries in Russia used the formula, Castro used the formula, the communist dictator in China used the formula. The formula is create a crisis, a manufactured crisis, which terrifies the people, get the people through mind control to go along with gun control, take away all the guns from the peaceful, law-abiding people, and then move in with your troops, your militarized police, and establish a police state and a dictatorship. And it's a slam dunk to do that, because you've now disarmed the people. So if they don't go along with your dictatorship, you can slaughter them in cold daylight. And that is the reality. Do you think the people in the mass media don't know that? There are so many people in our society that have been dumbed down through the educational process. I would venture to say that at least half the people in the mass media are so dumbed down, are so unaware of history, that they believe the lie that gun control will bring peace. But that leaves us with approximately 50% of the people, usually older, who've been around the block, who know full well that gun control always leads to tyranny. And yet they go along with it because they're frightened people. They go along with the Orwellian program of the thought police and mind control. So that's where we are. You see, the people who are really in power are manipulating our reality through television, through blog sites and websites and television news and everything to program people subconsciously and unconsciously, even through films. Now, there's a new film out called Black Panther. And I have not seen the film. I've simply watched several trailers of Black Panther. And it's obvious to any thinking person that Black Panther, the movie, has multiple messages that it's sending forth to the movie viewing audience. Multiple messages. It looks like it's a good movie, so it's going to do well at the box office. But on top of the fact that it's a good movie, it is promoting a number of ideas semi-consciously. I mean, they're not hiding it. They're actually saying it out loud, but most people just tune out because they're brainwashed to tune it out, but they absorb the message. Now, in a second, I'm going to play you just a few seconds of the trailer from the movie Black Panther, and I want you to listen very, very carefully. If you can hear the words, I want you to listen very, very carefully to the words that are being communicated. And don't think about the words logically and rationally. Just don't let the words of the songs float by your mind. Pay attention to what they're actually saying, because what they're actually saying is the programming that they're embedding in millions and millions of Americans. And let's just play part of the movie clip. And I think if you can hear the words and you pay very close attention to those words, you will understand the words convey a hypnotic message designed to program the people that come to watch the movie, young people especially. So let's hear some seconds from the Black Panther trailer, number 1. Okay, I don't know if you could hear the words, but we're going to go over some of them. And just remember, the brainwashing and mind control, that's not just from the movie Black Panther. That's happening with the vast majority of movies. And we're going to review it in just a second. And I think you will discover with me, and I wouldn't even suggest that the actors and a lot of the people associated with the movie have any idea about the extent of the mind control words that are being used. So hang in there. You're listening to the Paul McGuire Report. I'm Paul McGuire. Visit paulmcguire.us for more information on these topics. Get yourself a copy of Conquering the Matrix. We really dig in deep to the entire process of modern scientific mind control. Visit paulmcguire.us. Okay, we're going to replay it. It may have been difficult for you to hear the words. And you can't see the visuals, obviously, listening to the program. But it starts out by using that refrain: the revolution will not be televised. At least twice. The revolution will not be televised. That has been around for a while. So that's obviously conveying, I mean, why are they playing the lyrics, the revolution will not be televised, in a action hero movie? Because there's a sub-theme that the subconscious picks up. This movie, I believe, it's my personal opinion, that the lyrics in the movie, as well as some of the visuals in the movie, are inciting psychologically racial conflict. And when we look at modern mind control in how movies appear at certain times, it's not coincidental, it's planned. So we had the Black Lives Matter thing. We had the Ferguson thing a while back. We have the Black Panthers, okay? And this may seem difficult for you because it's so obvious, but modern mind control can often be very obvious. It's not an accident that they chose the Black Panther. Now, whether or not that was part of a Marvel franchise before, it may well have been. But believe me, it is not coincidental or accidental that the Black Panther movement has been resurging, the political activist movement is resurging, and that the movie, The Black Panther, with the same verbiage, is being promoted. Whether or not it reflects a pre-existing franchise is irrelevant. This is the basis of mind control. And the lyrics lend themselves to stirring up racial conflict and seeding ideas of racial revolution, black power, carried out through a violent revolution. When the words, you're going to bow down, you're going to bow down. I mean, man, if you don't understand what that's saying, then I can't help you, because why would they use the term you're going to bow down, out of the middle of nowhere? It has to do with the context of the mind control message, the hypnotic command. And there's others. Okay, so we're going to go back to this. This is the only way to do it. I hope I can give you a little better sound. This is from the trailer. We're going to go back to this in a second, and I'm going to talk, which will be obnoxious, me talking over the soundtrack. But that's I'm not set up here to do some really professional presentation for you. I just want you to get a taste of what this is. Just one of an entire spectrum of mind control messages in film, television, etc., etc. So hang in there, and we're going to review this. We're going to review it right now. Okay, so you're going to hear there's a queen-like figure, and she's saying to the hero in the movie, "My son, it's your time." That's a command. It's a call. This is your time. Now, forget about how you're processing it through your rational mind. Process it through your subconscious mind. You're speaking a command into the subconscious. This is your time. It's a call to action. It's provoking a revolution on the subconscious level. Now, let me play that for you.
My son, it is your time.
Okay, the next lyric is, "Show me my respect and bow down." This is tapping into racial conflict, racist feelings, where you have millions of African Americans in America who feel disenfranchised. They feel like they've been unjustly lorded over by the white man. And this, again, is speaking a subconscious command. Show me my respect and bow down. This is a primal need that's being exploited by mind control. These people are very good at what they do. Okay, and let's continue on.
You to decide what kind of king you are going to be. our face.
Okay, the revolution will not be televised. What does that have to do with the movie? Nothing. It's a call to revolution. This isn't the first time this mind control messaging system about revolution was used. This was used heavily, targeting white audiences in the 1970s, the early 1970s, with the counterculture. So let's continue on.
Show me my respect and bow down. We own you.
Show me my respect and bow down, okay? And then saying, we own you. You know, come on, man. Just imagine the subconscious. Don't process it through your conscious mind. You're going to miss it. The subconscious mind is responding to an authoritative appeal for revolution. Let's hear it some more.
We own you. We only getting started now. Cause we own you. You gotta think they know me now. Cause we own you. You and I, cause we own you. I waited my entire life for this.
Okay, we own you, we own you. Who do you think he owns or is going to own after the revolution? And then you hear the words, I've waited my entire life for this. Okay, let's continue.
The world's going to start over.
The world's going to start over. How? Scientific mind control. This is manufactured crisis. Order out of chaos. The world's going to start over. That means we're going to have a revolution, like a Marxist socialist revolution, in which they are being promised utopia through some kind of global government. They don't know they're going to get slavery again. Okay, so listen again carefully.
I'm going to burn it all.
I'm going to burn it all. Now, when we review, that's a subconscious command, and it's also related to occult lyrics and occult symbolism. The phoenix is a symbol of the New World Order. I talk about this in my book, A Prophecy of the Future of America and Mass Awakening. The phoenix is a symbol of the New World Order. The phoenix is a legendary mystical bird that is burned alive, and from a new world order is birthed out of the ashes of the old. So you create a planetary crisis, you burn up the present world system so that you can create a new world order. Let's continue listening.
What happens now determines what happens to the rest of the world.
What happens now determines what happens to the rest of the world. Now, I'm not going to go any further on these brainwashing messages, but you've got to really see, this is where you got to own the truth. If you want to understand how scientific mind control works, you can't play with it, man. You got to get down and conquer it and understand it. And so the message here is that the whole world, this can be the beginning of a new world order. They don't have to say new world order. It's in the imagery of the subconscious imagery of the movie. And the world can start over. This is the central occultic message that Led Zeppelin sang in the 70s, the Beatles sang in the 70s, the Rolling Stones sang, and now it's being recycled and targeted towards a more diverse and multi-ethnic audience. So the lyrics and framework are slightly different, but it's appealing to the same primal need. See, what's happening, you have to understand the target mind, the target demographic. We have the overt symbolism of a Black Panther, which just happens to be the name of a revolutionary movement. We have constant references to revolution. So in the psychological dynamics of this mind control message, it's appealing to the wounded, disenfranchised African Americans or people from other ethnic groups and perhaps white people. the disenfranchised, the wounded, the people that feel like they're left out. And it's offering them a promise subconsciously that if they participate in this revolution, that they can change the whole world. And this is a seduction, okay? And it's very powerful. And the people, I'm not talking about the actors and the directors, I'm talking about the psychological engineers, if you will, who created the messaging, are appealing to a deep woundedness and alienation in the subterranean caverns of the subconscious mind of the target demographic audience. And they're offering a solution, which is bloody revolution. Don't think for a moment that the timing of this movie, Black Panther, is timed to generate or pre-generate animosity and feelings of rebellion and revolution as we move into this interim election cycle coming up, and then as we move into the re-election of Donald Trump. George Soros and people like that have been funding these race riots, funding racial division. They use highly trained psychological operatives financed by people like George Soros. Okay, this is what is going on in the subconscious terrain. And so when you see circumstances happen, which you will because it's coordinated, where there are deaths, racial shootings, etc., you have people who have already been seeded by the millions with this message. All they need is the right provocation, and they will erupt in revolution. At the same time, because these people are demonically clever, they are seeding people in white America, young people in white America, to become right-wing, and they wanted to redefine them as right-wing extremists and KKK and white supremacists, which is a false narrative. But they want the two groups to conquer each other, not conquer each other, they want the two groups to fight one another so they can step in with their new world order, declare martial law, and it gives them the pretense for dictatorship. Now, this is sophisticated, and to really understand this, you have to understand history. This taps into Jungian archetypes and all kinds of things in the field of psychology. So, don't think for a moment, when you're looking at America, you should not have a puzzled look on your face when you're watching the news. There is a method to their madness. They're stirring it up, and this is a sledgehammer type of mind control programming. They're not beating around the bush, and you need to be aware of it. I strongly urge you to get a copy of Conquering the Matrix. You need to read it, understand it, and apply it to things like this. I'm just mentioning one movie. I can mention a whole plethora of movies that have equally powerful subconscious messages. But Charlie Manson died, 2 months ago? The head of the Manson family, the Manson murders and all that stuff. He was supposedly a victim of MK Ultra mind control. He heard, while on LSD or whatever, he claimed to have heard messages in the Beatles albums where Charlie Manson said, that Helter Skelter was a code word for a racial revolution between white and black people, etc. And he claimed, Charlie Manson, that the Beatles' music was being used to seed a racial revolution called Helter Skelter. Now, you can say Charlie Manson was crazy, and he may be flat out nuts and crazy, but it appeared he did go through something akin to MK Ultra, and I deal with him specifically in A Prophecy of the Future of America. I'm telling you, he wasn't as crazy as you think he was. Okay, because the Beatles, their music was filled with subliminal mind control messages about Satanism and Aleister Crowley and all kinds of things, as were the rest, like Led Zeppelin, etc. So We're not just moving in the world of rational, logical, thinking, analysis of situations. That's not how the world works. Let's give you another example. Why do you think there is an all-out, constant barrage of late-night comedians? Kathy Griffith making a head where, it's a bloody model of Trump's head being chopped off in blood. Why do you think you have all these movie stars calling for his assassination and killing? What do you think that's about? Do you think these are isolated people acting in an isolated manner? No, this is a mind control operation where you desensitize the American people, where you desensitize the people that hate Trump, and you're provoking violence against Trump and his administration. You're provoking race wars. You're provoking all kinds of things. Okay? That is why the media environment is saturated with these kinds of images. It's not an accident. The purpose is not entertainment. Now, I hate to break it to you, but the stooges who call themselves comedians late at night, the reason the first 15 minutes of their shows are so heavily political and always anti-Trump, the reason for that is there is a large demographic in the United States, which I will politely call idiots, the idiot demographic, which can't analyze, which really can't think, but they will watch late night comedy. And so the elite know this, so they're going to spoon feed and program the minds of what I call the idiot demographic and fill them with anti-Trump messages of hatred, Saturday Night Live, so on and so forth. And so this is the only time they can program the idiot demographic, because the idiot demographic is not watching news or Fox News, etc. And what we have here is mass mind control. You have to understand it. It's not a paranoid conspiracy theory. It is a reality. It was planned in the 1800s. I have read volume after volume of the scientific works of people like Edward Bernays, the father of modern advertising, and so many other communications specialists. Edward Bernays was the man who programmed women across the world to believe that smoking a cigarette made them sexually attractive. And he did this by staging events where movie stars and beautiful women would be seen in Hollywood smoking a cigarette. And then he would saturate the media with images of beautiful, attractive, famous women smoking cigarettes. And it wasn't long after that every woman on a subconscious level began to associate smoking cigarettes with glamour, sexual attractiveness, and beauty. He created that. But he went on quite a bit further than that. And in fact, Adolf Hitler used his propaganda methodology, Edward Bernays, to use mind control on the German masses and program to hate the Jews. So we're dealing with a very sophisticated, and this whole science of modern mind control has been escalated and developed over the last 25 years. It is truly a science of the highest order, and it has to do with subliminal programming and the unconscious and all kinds of things. So this is a powerful force in today's world. And if you're not aware of it, and if you're not 10 steps ahead of people, then you are going to be sucker punched to death. And they're going to take you down, they're going to take your children down, and they're going to take everything you have. Because this operation is run by a globalist elite that are ruthlessly selfish. And the entire mythology that this globalist elite is composed of kind, gentle, benevolent, and compassionate people is an outright outrageous lie. This globalist elite, they are behind vaccinations for the purpose of wiping out what they consider inferior populations. They are behind the chemtrail poisoning. They are behind contaminants in the water supply and the food supply. They are behind mass euthanasia in the African continent. Why the African continent? Because they're racists. And they are behind birth control, abortion, because one of the phobias, one of the obsessions of this occult globalist elite, one of their primary tenets of their belief system is they believe that overpopulation is the world's primary problem. And in order for them to heal the planet and make a paradise out of this world, they are going to have to kill off billions of people. They've said this in their own writing. And what we need to remember is that these are not nice people. And you see, they hire movie stars and celebrities, you know, like Bono and Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt and so many others. They hire these movie stars to be their public faces of their one world society in the United Nations. But they're hiding from the public that these are the same people. Listen to me really carefully. These are the same people who financed Adolf Hitler and knew full well that he was going to slaughter 8 million people in the concentration camps. Wall Street and the globalist elite financed Hitler. These are the people who financed Chairman Mao. These are the people who financed the communist revolution in Russia, which killed about 100 million people. These people are dark. They worship Lucifer and Satanism. They hate Christianity. And this whole scam they have running about how we're going to create a utopian one-world planet, you know, based after the song of John Lennon, Imagine There's No Heaven. Imagine, you know, there's no nations or countries to die for. Imagine there's no religion. Imagine there's no money. That was all propaganda. John Lennon was a stooge. He was singing a propaganda song for the New World Order. And then they killed him. And they have no intention of keeping those promises. And again, this is something, you know, we have to look at the facts, not succumb to brainwashing. That's why in my book, A Prophecy of the Future of America, 2016-2017, I go over the economics. The economics doesn't lie. You've been told over and over again how generous, how compassionate the globalist elite are with their one world government and their desire for ecology, right? Well, in the past 3 years alone, just in 3 years alone, due to the trade treaties that all the leading Democrats and Republicans signed on, they created untold wealth for the world's globalist elite. So 3 years ago, the globalist elite, which control, they represent only, then, a couple of years ago, they represented 3% of the population globally. But they controlled 97% of the wealth globally. And now, this year, new data has come out that the globalist elite now represent only 1% of the global population, but they control 99% of all the wealth. Now, you can do the math. Do you see anything remotely fair or equitable or just or social justice or compassion in that? No, this is the expression of unbridled lust and greed, where they are in the business by cheating you out of your money. Yeah, cheating you, and you better wake up to it. Cheating you out of your money through trade treaties and financial policies. They have robbed the American middle class and working class blind. And while the American middle class and working class is struggling to maintain the same living status that the middle class had, let's say, 15, 20 years ago, the reality is they have confiscated the wealth for their own personal enrichment. So you can't be fooled. You really have to know what's going on. They're not nice people. That's why Satanism, Luciferianism, pedophilia, and many, many other very dark things go on behind the scenes in these power centers of the elite. They don't like Jesus Christ. They're Antichrist. I know that's hard for some of you to assimilate, but they're Antichrist. And they are all part of the biblical progression in Bible prophecy towards the reemergence of Mystery Babylon and the one world religion and the one world economic system and the one world government. They are behind that, and they are behind that because they intend, in their own words and writings, to usher in this global government that will be headed up by the Antichrist and a new world religion and a new world economic system that will be headed up by the false prophet. And so they are fulfilling Bible prophecy. So the question is, what is your role in what's going on? Well, I would suggest to you that you can't play a decisive role if you're in the dark. If you're in a daze of mind control, you won't be able to do much of anything. But do you think God called you before the beginning of the world to be here for such a time as this, to just be passive and indifferent to literally a globalist elite occult takeover of planet Earth? Is that what it's all about? Because they don't play games. They are, right now, as we're talking, they are censoring and rewiring the entire internet. And if they have their way, and they're getting very close to it, they will not allow free speech anywhere. People think that the guy from Facebook or Google, they're your friends. They're not your friends, they're your enemies. They're taking you down to hell, and you can't even see it, some of you. And the same with a lot of these media personalities. You think they're so fair and wonderful and caring. They're not, man. They are very dark hearts. So you need to be aware of what's going on. You need to be aware of what their game plan is so that you can do something about it. So what can you do about it? Well, first thing is you've got to be educated. Knowledge is of power. If you don't have knowledge, if you don't know what's going on, then you are set up to be taken down. Once you acquire knowledge, which is power, truth that will set you free, then you need to recognize that God knew that this time was coming from the beginning of time, and you need to recognize that God has given his people spiritual weapons to fight both a spiritual and a physical reality battle. But that also involves setting people free from mind control. The old-fashioned word for mind control in ancient societies was sorcery. So ancient sorcery is simply mind control using contemporary words. So you have to understand how to deprogram people through the weapons of our warfare, which are mighty through God to the pulling down of strongholds. You need to know how to use the spiritual weapons that God has given you to fight a spiritual war. And the primary spiritual weapon is knowing the terrain of the battlefield, knowing who you are up against, and then using the weapons that your Supreme Commander, Jesus Christ, has given you to fight this war victoriously. And those weapons are spiritual weapons. This is the Paul McGuire Report. I'm Paul McGuire. You can get more information. By the way, our Roku channel is up and running with like 36 hours of programming or more we just put up. Go to paulmcguire.us and you'll see the big Roku banner. You click that and you can go to right to the Roku channel, and you just type in Paul McGuire Ministries and you can take advantage of that. And thank you to all of you out there who helped finance with your contributions that effort. We've just begun. We're going to expand it rapidly. And thank you for those of you that have chosen to become prayer warriors and to keep us in prayer, because this is a spiritual battle. And we must have your prayers on a daily basis, because without prayer, we can't take the land that God wants us to take. This is the Paul McGuire Report. I'm Paul McGuire. Visit paulmcguire.us. This is Paul McGuire, and it's essential if you want to be victorious personally, if we want to be victorious in the assignment and mission Jesus has given us, if we want to be overcomers, the only way we can be overcomers and victorious is to fight the spiritual battle before us using the weapons that God specifically designed for us that will enable us to achieve victory. And the Apostle Paul in the book of Ephesians outlines these weapons. The weapons of our warfare are mighty through God to the pulling down of strongholds. We cannot defeat the adversary using human weapons. We must use spiritual weapons. The first and most important spiritual weapon for you in any situation is the power of prayer. Going before the Lord, talking to Him, asking Him for help, petitioning Him, praying for other people, praying for yourself, praying for loved ones, praying for crisis situations and other situations in our nation. You need to remember something. You may feel like the Lord's trying to put a burden on your heart about praying for some situation or some person in a spiritual battle. And many times we shuffle off that assignment from God because we falsely assume that, well, if I don't pray, there's lots of people that will be praying. Never make that assumption. In stark contrast, the reality may be, if you don't pray, nobody may be praying. Don't assume that there's some kind of magical army out there praying. Sometimes God has knocked on the doors of countless hearts and nobody will respond but you. That's why the Lord talks about looking for somebody to stand in the gap. And in that verse, he looked to and fro across the nation, and he couldn't find one man or woman to stand in the gap. So if you believe the Lord is calling you to pray for something, then you have to be obedient and pray. In addition to the fact that you may be the only person praying, you need to realize the power of your prayers just by yourself. And that as you begin to be faithful to the Lord in being obedient in intercessory prayer, you will discover inevitably that you become stronger and stronger and stronger spiritually. And as you become a prayer warrior, one of the first principles to understand is that the more you're obedient to God, the more that you begin to pray, you will discover that the level of your faith begins to grow. And it gets stronger and stronger and stronger. And as you're faithful to pray, as God calls you to, you will start to notice that you have been given the power to believe God for the impossible, and that you can pray and you truly expect things to happen, and they do happen, because your faith and your ability to pray have grown, because you're faithful. So when you choose to be faithful as an intercessory prayer warrior, that's not a static concept. You grow exponentially. You become stronger and stronger in the Lord. Your faith becomes stronger and stronger. And then you become the kind of person that when you pray, God answers in miraculous ways. You see, that privilege is not given to just every Christian. It's only given to those who choose to dwell under the secret place of the Most High. As you are faithful with what God has given you, He will grow you and expand your spiritual gifts and abilities. And many of you desire that the Lord would use you in special ways, or you desire that the Lord would allow you to do this or that. Well, let me tell you something. That the Lord wants to give you the desires of your heart. But it all begins with the Lord trusting you to be obedient and to pray for the things He's calling you to pray for, when nobody's looking. If you will develop the habit of faithful, habitual prayer, God will raise you up and you will be a person that sees miracles. The person who prays 5 minutes a week or 5 minutes a month, they may see some miracles due to God's grace, but they are not men and women of spiritual power. That spiritual power only comes to those people who are faithful to exercise the gift that God has called them to utilize in the power of prayer. And that works in other areas of spirituality as well. Another important area is that many times believers in Christ feel, well, their prayers don't make any difference, or, I've prayed, I don't see any results, and all this stuff. Again, I want to go back to this foundational principle. And I'm not trying to condemn you. I'm trying to challenge you to grow spiritually. But you can pray, and occasionally, and you probably won't see tremendous power, but God will answer your prayers. But if you'll really purpose in your heart to be a man or woman of praying, and that means you're consistent. It's like anything else. If you're consistent in your praying, as time passes on, you will become stronger and stronger and stronger. Your faith will grow stronger and stronger. And when you pray, you will see doors open miraculously, the enemy defeated miraculously, and you will begin to see miracles as a regular part of your life. But it begins with being faithful where the Lord starts you. And so I want to encourage you, you can't afford to wait any longer. And you don't have to be perfect either. Just get in there and start praying. And watch and see what the Lord will do. And you will be stunned how much he grows you in prayer and faith. In the same way, when it comes to national events, like praying for the president, or praying for this crisis, or praying against riots, and you will find, because you've been faithful in these other prayers, that you can see an event on television, or the Lord will warn you prophetically regarding something that is coming that has not materialized in the media yet, but you feel an unction, you feel a burden from the Holy Spirit to pray, because the Lord is calling you to pray, even though there's no physical evidence that you should be praying this way. But also there are times you'll see things happen on television, etc. The Lord will give you commandments to pray. Now, when you first start out, you may get discouraged and say, well, I pray, I don't see anything happen. But let me tell you something. I know lots and lots of people who were faithful in their intercessory prayers. They stayed on it. They continued to pray. And as the Lord built their faith, and as the Lord strengthened their belief and their ability to pray, many of these people who started out feeling rather very limited, they can pray for things on TV. They can pray when God gives them prophetic instructions. And I have seen these people pray heaven down when hell is raging on earth. And I've seen it in my own life, and I don't want to boast, so I'm not going to go into it. But I have seen things happen on a national level through my prayers, other people's prayers, that like I'm stunned. Okay, I'm stunned because when I first started out, I wouldn't have ever dared to believe that God would answer a prayer like that. So you'd be surprised how fast God will grow you. And then you got to remember that the weapons of our warfare are mighty through God to the pulling down of strongholds. And the Apostle Paul says that we're to wear the full armor of God. And the Apostle Paul tells us, for our fight is not against flesh and blood, but against the principalities, against the powers, against the dark unseen forces of wickedness in heavenly places. And God will fight these enormous spiritual battles. He will send his angels forward to defeat the adversary. And you, when you exercise your authority in Jesus Christ, you can take dominion over these principalities and powers and these demonic forces and principalities and powers and other things. You can take dominion, and you can actually see changes happen. You can see revival begin to move in people's hearts and minds, in individual lives and in the lives of the people that you're praying for in locations. So I'm going to encourage you, it's not as hard as you think it is. Now, I praise God for all of you that have chosen, in response to the Holy Spirit calling you, to partner with me in this ministry through your intercessory prayers, to choose to pray for me, my family, and the different outreaches we're involved in. I want to thank God for you, because I know the power that moves through this ministry and that moves through my life is not me. It's people like you that are praying for me. I know it. I can feel it. And number two is I want to thank God for those of you that go to the Lord. The Lord gives you a burden, and you want to partner with us in changing the destiny of America by bringing in a last days soul harvest and preaching the gospel. And you go to the Lord and ask the Lord, Lord, how can I help? And then the Lord speaks to you about what to contribute or what to donate, and you're faithful. I want to thank God for your faithfulness, because you and all the people who have responded to the Lord, you've enabled us to do things, and we're going to continue to do them and continue to expand them, that are making global and national changes. And I can't discuss them all publicly over this radio program, but you would be surprised, due to the prayer warriors out there and due to the people that are seeking the Lord about how they can contribute, you would be surprised at the level of miracles, the level of favor, the level of access, and the number of people we're influencing, all of which we would not be able to do without your prayers and your support. So when I thank you for being partners, I mean that in the truest sense of the word. Your partnership, us standing together as one in Jesus Christ, enables us to do things with far more power than we could possibly do by ourselves. And that's a reality. And I believe that the Lord grows each one of us and blesses each one of us as we step out in faith to obey him. So thank you for partnering with me. And whatever situation you may personally be facing, the spiritual teaching that I've offered you on how to wage spiritual warfare applies to any spiritual battle that we're facing in our national life, but it also applies to any spiritual battle that you may be facing by yourself. Never doubt the power of God's prayer. Never doubt the miracles that can happen, the turnarounds that can happen when you go to God, stand on his word, and ask him in Jesus' name. God bless you. I'm Paul McGuire. Visit paulmcguire.us. That's paulmcguire.us.